It was a regular day, like any other, a warm, sunny morning where I found myself wrapped up in the rhythm of household chores, dancing to my favorite music. My husband, John, was at work, and the kids were off to school. It was just me, the music, and the quiet peace of solitude, something I usually cherish. But that day, something unexpected happened. Something I never saw coming. I didn't even hear the doorbell ring. When I finally noticed, I was startled, realizing someone was standing by the window, watching me. It was Daniel, a friend of my husband's, someone who had borrowed our lawnmower a few days earlier. What began as an ordinary task turned into something I can barely make sense of even now. His arrival and the conversation that followed changed everything. I need to tell this story. It may not paint me in the best light, but it's the truth. Sometimes, life throws us into moments where we don't recognize ourselves. This is one of those moments for me. A moment where the boundaries blurred and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and the life I've built. Daniel stood there for a moment longer than felt comfortable, watching me through the window. It wasn't like him to linger. Usually, he'd just drop something off and go. But this time was different. I was still in my towel, having been so absorbed in my cleaning and music that I hadn't realized how vulnerable I was in that moment. When I finally noticed him, my heart jumped. Why hadn't he just knocked louder? Why was he standing there like that? Flustered, I rushed to cover myself, pulling on the closest thing I could find, a loose gown that did little to hide the sudden feeling of exposure creeping over me. Trying to calm my nerves, I went outside where Daniel stood awkwardly beside the lawnmower, his hand running through his hair, eyes darting nervously as if unsure how to explain himself. "Daniel, what were you doing at the windows?" I asked, forcing a casual tone, though my voice betrayed me with a slight tremble. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I knocked a couple of times, but no one answered. Then I saw you inside, and, well, I thought maybe something was wrong, so I waited to make sure you were okay." His explanation made sense, more or less, but something about the way he looked at me made my skin prickle. It wasn't just concern in his eyes. There was something else. Something I didn't want to acknowledge. I tried to laugh it off. "You looked more like a burglar than a concerned friend, staring through the window like that." He laughed too, but it felt forced, uneasy. Then, as if trying to shift the awkwardness, he suggested we get something to drink to cool off from the heat. Reluctantly, I agreed, unsure of what else to say or do. I invited him inside. Once we were settled in the living room with glasses of juice, the tension didn't fade. It only grew. He sat across from me on the couch, and his eyes lingered, making me feel bare even though I was fully dressed now. He commented on how surprising it was to see me so relaxed, so different from the quiet, composed woman he thought he knew. I wasn't sure how to respond. No one had ever spoken to me like that, certainly not one of John's friends. His words hung in the air, carrying a weight I wasn't prepared for. I could feel the energy between us shift, and I knew I should stop it right then, redirect the conversation, make an excuse to end this strange moment. But something inside me, something I wasn't proud of, wanted to see where this was going. Before I could react, Daniel leaned forward and kissed me. It was brief, hesitant, as if testing the waters. My mind screamed at me to push him away, to say something, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, my lips parted just enough to let that kiss linger longer than it should have. And then it was over. My stomach twisted with guilt as the reality of what had just happened washed over me. What are we doing?" I finally managed to whisper, the weight of the moment crashing down on me. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean," he stammered, backing away, his face pale with regret. I don't know what came over me, but I knew. I had felt it too. The spark, the temptation that had ignited between us in the most unexpected of ways. It wasn't planned, but it had happened, and now there was no going back. For a moment, we just stood there, both lost in the mess we had just created. I wanted to blame him, to tell him this was his fault, but deep down I knew I had been complicit. I had allowed it to happen. I could have stopped it, but I didn't. He apologized again, his voice thick with regret, and I nodded numbly. He knelt down in front of me, almost begging for forgiveness, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and confusion. Without thinking, I reached for an old bracelet that had been lying on the shelf, a childhood keepsake, and handed it to him, as if offering him a token of peace, a way to calm the storm between us. He took it, his fingers brushing mine, and for a brief moment, the tension between us softened. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. Daniel stood, mumbling something about needing to leave. We hugged goodbye, a hug that felt both too intimate and too distant at the same time. And as he walked out the door, I felt a deep pang of regret, but also something else. Desire. How could I feel this way? How could I allow myself to want something so forbidden, so wrong? After he left, the house felt impossibly quiet. The music, which had once filled the room with joy, now seemed distant and hollow. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying the events of that morning in my mind. What had just happened? How had everything spiraled so quickly out of control? The guilt was overwhelming. I loved my husband. There was no question about that. But there was a part of me, a small, hidden part, that had been awakened by Daniel's kiss. A part that had been dormant for so long I had forgotten it existed. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About him. The warmth of his touch. The way he had looked at me. The emotions that had rushed through me in that single, stolen moment. And now, I was left with the fallout, alone, unsure of what to do next. Over the next few days, I tried to push the memory of that kiss to the back of my mind. I threw myself into my routine, cleaning the house, taking care of the kids, making small talk with my husband, John. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling of Daniel's lips on mine, the electricity in the air when he touched me. It haunted me, creeping into my thoughts when I least expected it. Every time John spoke to me, every time he smiled or reached out to hold my hand, a wave of guilt would crash over me, threatening to pull me under. How could I have done this to him? He was a good man. He worked hard, provided for our family, and loved me in his own quiet, steady way. But lately, our lives had become predictable, safe, boring, even. That morning with Daniel had stirred something inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Desire, yes, but more than that. It was the thrill, the excitement, the danger. It had been so long since I'd felt truly seen, truly wanted, and that scared me. One night, as we sat at the dinner table, John casually mentioned Daniel, unaware of the storm raging inside me. Daniel said he had a great time the other day when he stopped by to drop off the lawnmower. He said you guys had a good chat. My heart skipped a beat. I forced a smile, hoping he couldn't see the panic in my eyes. Yeah, he did stop by. It was nice to catch up. John didn't notice anything unusual in my response. He just nodded, taking another bite of his dinner. But inside, I felt like I was going to explode. The mere mention of Daniel's name was enough to send my mind spiraling back to that moment, to the kiss we had shared. I could still feel it, still taste it, and it terrified me. Later that night, after John had fallen asleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't go on like this, living with the guilt, the secret. But what was I supposed to do? Could I really just forget about it? Could I pretend it never happened? Or was there something deeper here? Something I needed to confront? A few days later, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, closure. I needed to see Daniel again. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to accomplish. Maybe I just wanted to understand why that kiss had affected me so much, why I couldn't stop thinking about him. Or maybe I just wanted to know if he felt the same way. I found myself standing outside the coffee shop where I knew Daniel spent his weekends. My heart raced as I opened the door and stepped inside, scanning the room until my eyes landed on him. He was sitting at a table in the corner, his head bent over a book. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes widened in surprise. "Lauren," he said, standing up to greet me. "I didn't expect to see you here." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, gesturing for me to sit. We sat across from each other in the quiet corner of the cafe, the tension between us palpable. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I didn't know how to begin, how to address the elephant in the room. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "about that day. I don't know what came over me. I shook my head. It's not just your fault, I said, my voice trembling. I didn't stop it. I let it happen. He looked down at the table, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. I've been thinking about it a lot, he admitted.
About you.
I haven't been able to get you out of my mind. His confession hit me like a punch to the gut. A part of me had hoped that maybe he had forgotten, that it had been a fleeting moment for him. But hearing him say it out loud only made everything more complicated. Because the truth was, I had been thinking about him too. I don't know what this is, I said, my voice shaking. But I can't do this. I have a family, a husband. I can't just throw that all away. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding, but also with something deeper. I know, and I don't want to be the reason you lose that, but I can't ignore what I feel. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, my emotions swirling in a chaotic mess. I couldn't do this. I couldn't tear apart my family, couldn't hurt John, couldn't risk everything for something so uncertain. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward Daniel. The connection between us was undeniable, and the thought of walking away from it felt almost unbearable. We sat in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke the words I knew we both needed to hear. We can't do this, I said, my voice firm but laced with pain. This, whatever it is, it has to end here. We have to stop. Daniel looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, a sad smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. You're right, he said quietly. It has to end. The weight of those words settled between us like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. We both knew it was the right decision, the only decision. But that didn't make it any easier. We stood up, awkwardly hugging each other one last time. As I walked out of the coffee shop, my heart felt heavy with loss, but also with a strange sense of relief. It was over. The door had been closed. But as I stepped into the sunlight, I couldn't help but wonder if a part of me would always be standing in that coffee shop, waiting for what could have been. The days that followed my meeting with Daniel were some of the hardest I had faced in years. On the outside, everything looked the same. Our house still bustled with the sounds of our children. John still came home from work each night with a kiss on my cheek, and I still moved through my routine like clockwork. But inside, I was struggling. I had shut the door on Daniel, but that didn't mean I could erase him from my thoughts. I would catch myself wondering what he was doing, if he was thinking about me too. Every time I passed the coffee shop or saw a lawnmower in someone's yard, memories of that day with Daniel would come rushing back, like a wave pulling me under. But I had made my choice. I had chosen my family, my husband, the life we had built together. And now I had to find a way to repair the damage I had done to my marriage, to my sense of self, to everything I had almost lost. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat across from John at the dinner table, watching him as he absent-mindedly scrolled through his phone. I realized, with a sudden pang of guilt, how much we had grown apart without even noticing. We used to talk for hours, laugh about the little things that happened in our day. Now, we barely exchanged more than a few sentences. The distance between us had created a space that Daniel had slipped into so easily. And now it was up to me to close that gap before it widened any further. John, I said softly, my voice cutting through the silence of the room. He looked up, surprised by the tone in my voice.
Yeah?
I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. There was so much I wanted to say, so much I needed to fix, but I didn't know where to start. So I started with the truth. I've been feeling distant lately.
From you.
From us. John's brow furrowed, and he set his phone down, giving me his full attention. Distant? What do you mean? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I just feel like we've lost something. We don't talk like we used to. We don't connect the way we used to. It's like we're living parallel lives, but we're not really living them together. John's expression softened, and he reached across the table to take my hand. I've felt that too, he admitted. I've just been so caught up in work, and I guess I didn't realize how much it was affecting us. I'm sorry, Lauren. His apology hit me harder than I expected. I had been so consumed by my own guilt and confusion that I hadn't stopped to consider that he might be feeling the same way. We had both let our relationship slip, and now we were paying the price. "I'm sorry, too," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "I want to fix this, John. I want us to find our way back to each other." John's eyes searched mine, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of hope. "I want that too," he said softly. "We can fix this, Lauren. I know we can." In that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't a grand, dramatic change. It was small, almost imperceptible, like the first light of dawn breaking through the darkness. But it was enough. It was a start. We spent the next few weeks slowly rebuilding what we had lost. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wondered if we would ever truly get back to the way things had been. But we were both trying, and that was what mattered. John started making more time for us, for our family. He would come home from work earlier, help with the kids, and we started going on small dates again, like we used to before life got so busy. We didn't talk about Daniel, and I didn't see him again, but the shadow of what had almost happened lingered in the background. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, John turned to me, his expression serious. "Lauren," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I want us to be honest with each other from now on. I don't want there to be any secrets between us." My heart clenched at his words, and for a moment, I feared he had somehow found out about Daniel. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized he was talking about something deeper, about the emotional walls we had built around ourselves over the years, the things we hadn't said, the feelings we hadn't shared. "I don't want secrets either," I replied quietly. "I want us to be open with each other, about everything." John nodded, and we sat there in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. In that quiet moment, I realized that the real work was just beginning. It wasn't enough to simply go through the motions. We had to keep choosing each other, every day. We had to fight for our marriage, for our family, for the love that had once been so easy, but had become buried under the weight of routine and complacency. As the weeks turned into months, John and I grew closer. We started talking again, really talking about our hopes, our fears, our dreams for the future. We laughed together, like we used to, and the distance between us began to fade. But I knew that what had happened with Daniel would always be a part of me, a reminder of how easy it was to lose sight of what truly mattered. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but it had also been a wake-up call. I had almost thrown away everything I loved, and I would never let that happen again. One night, as John and I lay in bed, he wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "I love you, Lauren. I always have, and I always will." Tears filled my eyes, and I pressed my face into his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my cheek. "I love you too, John," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." And in that moment, I knew that we were going to be okay. We still had a long way to go, but we were on the right path. We were finding our way back to each other, piece by piece, and I was ready to fight for us, for our love, for our family. Because sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting the most. And this was worth everything.